Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, across this great country. If it's Tuesday, we start out on the banks of Cleveland, Ohio. The Flats, you may call it. It's the American Sports History Podcast, hosted by my good friend Peter Ray. Yours truly, Mark Mancini here producing. 347-205-9631. The call in. Boy, this show goes by quick, so you listeners, just at least if we get this thing up to an hour down the line, we can get the callers coming in, but you blink and 30 minutes goes by quick. Catch the archive version, blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. Podcast platforms powered now by Mancini Media. Without further ado, let me lay the red carpet down. Put the podium in its place, hand off the mic. First of all, Peter, how are you? Second of all, how can people get a hold of you? Third of all, you brought some. Just seems like every week a new great talent comes through here to interview, and I'll let you do the introductions, my friend.
Yes, Mark. The famous three questions. I'll try to remember them. I'm doing well. I have a website, or I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter J. Ray, R-E-A. I've made 704 history videos in 7 areas: world history, American history, and every year of Cleveland baseball history going back to 1869. You're absolutely right about our guests tonight. You know, as a lover of baseball history, it's incredible how many wonderful baseball books have been written dealing with baseball history, and I'm so grateful to all the authors. You know, they've made my life added so much to my life. These authors who work hard and focus on a topic in baseball, in this case, and then just have these tremendous books. And tonight we have an author of 2 baseball books, The 10 Commandments of Baseball, which came out in 2009, and Baseball's Winning Ways. He's a longtime Chicago Cubs fan and also a Milwaukee Brewers fan. Welcome to the show, Mr. J.D. Thorne.
Thank you, Peter.
Now, J.D., to start off, you want to give us an overview of your connection with baseball?
Well, I'm like many kids in America. I grew up playing ball. I had an older brother who was a ball player, and he taught me how to put my uniform on, and it was a great thing. I always felt when I went out onto the diamond, I looked okay, and they wouldn't laugh at me. But the fun part is that baseball has been ingrained in my family for years. Not only did my brother play baseball, my father played amateur baseball in the city of Chicago, and hardball baseball. And when he was married, my grandfathers met in 1939, and they figured out over a glass of beer that they had both pitched against each other in a hardball baseball game in 1910.
Wow. How about that? Okay, can you go ahead?
I accumulate all of that culture from baseball, but we're longtime Cubs fans, but now I live in Milwaukee, and I've become a Milwaukee Brewers fan.
Now, the first book you came out, The 10 Commandments of Baseball. Would you like to talk about that book?
Well, thank you. That came from my father. When we were going through my father's effects after he passed away in about 2002, one of the things my brother came upon was a card in his top dresser drawer, which was from an Iowa baseball-themed restaurant, the Dugout Restaurant, and it said it had the 10 Commandments of Baseball on it, and a picture of the proprietor on one side, pitched for the New York Yankees, and on the other side was the 10 Commandments of Baseball by Joe McCarthy. Now, I did not know Joe McCarthy. I should have, when I think about it. and yet he managed from 1926 to 1952. He managed the Cubs, the Yankees, and the Boston Red Sox. Now, how do you do better than that? With the three greatest franchises, really, historic franchises, and he won 7 World Series championships, and has the highest winning percentage of any manager ever in baseball, even more than Tony La Russa, which I think is the big story in baseball today. A 76-year-old managing the White Sox, who are contenders, and the owner, believes in him enough that he's going to go do it. And I really, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, you bring up Joe McCarthy, kind of a forgotten guy because he's before people think of Casey Stengel in terms of Yankee managers, right. And then Miller Huggins early on in Babe Ruth's time but I believe, did McCarthy manage Babe Ruth?
He did. He managed Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio during the 56-game hitting streak. He let DiMaggio hit. He was very good with older players that he didn't, inhibit them because they know how to play. They came to play every day. He really focused managing on the younger players, which was he was just terrific all the way around.
You want to talk about a few of the commandments of baseball?
Well, the first one I always love is. The first commandment is no one ever became a baseball player by walking after baseball. In other words, you learn how to hustle. And then when I wrote the book, I thought of, well, who were players that really hustled? Of course, number one, Ty Cobb. And when you think of Ty Cobb, and I looked up his statistics, and they were unbelievable. There were 8 times during his career where he got on first, stole second, stole third, and stole home. Now, that's not so easy.
Ty Cobb. The name of the game is entertainment, and he was entertaining because Cobb got on first, and you didn't know when he was going to take off, or if he'd take the extra base. So fans loved Cobb.
Thank you, Peter. There's a lot of things about Cobb, though, that he gets a bad rap from the Field of Dreams movie. Oh, Ty Cobb, you were an asshole. We don't want you playing with us. But in actuality, he got accused of being a racist because he was from Alabama, and yet his family owned a farm, and they were part of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, the Charles Learson biography set the record straight on Cobb, and it was a real terrible thing that Al Stump did, and the book he wrote, which was just trying because people love hating a villain, and so we had Cindy Cobb, the granddaughter of Ty Cobb, on the show, so that was it's good for people to know the truth about Ty Cobb. He was not a bad guy. He wasn't perfect, but who is? But he played hard, people think he's a villain, and he wasn't.
Well, here's a couple stories with him when he first went to the major leagues. So he's like 18, 19 years old. The Tigers owner brings him up. Well, when he got up to the big team in Detroit, well, what did that mean? That means they had to release somebody. Mm-hmm. And so they had to release a veteran who was very popular with the players. And then Ty Cobb is the new guy. Well, they placed him with the catcher, and the catcher was a big, brawny guy, big fellow that after every game during the first year when Ty Cobb came up, beaten up when they went back to the hotel room, just for being the guy that replaced the other veteran that they liked.
Cobb got beat up by this catcher?
He got beat up by the catcher, right?
Oh boy.
And that's your introduction to baseball. And then at the very same time, the heartbreak of the personal situation where his father was killed by his mother by a shotgun when she mistook him for a robber when he got up on the roof thinking that she was betraying him. Now, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that was and that came, I mean, couldn't have been worse.
So he had a hard psychology coming up, but it was fun when I got to my second book, Baseball's Winning Ways, to talk a few Ty Cobb stories that were a little more fun.
Right.
One of the things was, in Baseball's Winning Ways, the second book, which I really want, it's designed for an educational market. It grades out at a 9th grade level of reading, which was probably the best I could muster. The idea being that I think the Baseball's Winning Ways would be something that young men and women too maybe would like to read. It would be interesting to them. So it's sort of like Harry Potter was interesting for people learning to read. And that's what Baseball's Winning Ways is about. So we talked about various different players, a little bit about Ty Cobb, a little bit about the many players, and old and new, from Wee Willie Keeler to Christian Yelich. And we wanted new players because that would be what young people would be interested in. So to put the combination together of about 60 players, just kind of really chose from random. Like Ernie Lombardi from the Cincinnati Reds in the late 1930s. Now, who knows about Ernie Lombardi? Nobody.
Uh-huh.
Who thought about him in years? Nobody. But he's Hall of Fame. Very important to the team at that time. 2 World Series championship rings. He was a bigger. He was slow on the bases and hit into a lot of double plays and was criticized for that. But he was also MVP for 2 years behind the plate, despite that. So I think that's the kind of guy that we want to take a look at a little bit. And, let's think about him. So there are other players like that, and that's kind of who we chose. My favorite player that we chose, that we were thinking like baseball cards, is that on the back of a baseball card, there would usually be a little small biography of a player. Well, let's put some of those in. And that was the idea behind it. So we the publisher and I, and in Baseball's Winning Ways, really put together a narrative that flows. It goes from, we start with Hank Aaron, different players. We didn't pick every player, but we did pick Tommy Lasorda and Phil Niekro and several other players that were, all of a sudden they passed away this past year. We went, oh.
Why
did we pick them? But they were in the 60 players or so that we picked.
Right. It's wonderful. The last night I started watching the 1975 All-Star game, which was in Milwaukee, and
oh, there you go.
It was interesting because Henry Aaron got a special introduction, and here he'd won. The Milwaukee Braves won. That was a kind of that was a very strange historical thing. The Milwaukee Braves that came and left very short, in less than 20 years, won a World Series, almost won another one, had tremendous attendance, and then they were gone. And then of course he was on that team. And then here he breaks Babe Ruth's record in '74. And I guess the Braves thought, well, he's old, and he really, and so he goes to Milwaukee the next year as a DH for the next 2 years, and he has this tremendous roar of applause because they remembered here in 1975. They remembered him from 1957, and of course he's nationally famous. So I thought that was a wonderful thing, and so it's Henry Aaron. What a guy, and what a moment in '74. When he breaks hits 715.
Well, he 57 too, when he led the Braves to the World Series, and actually the Braves were great. 56, 57, 58, and 59. They were there all 4 of those years, but only once in 57 did they break through to win the actual World Series. And those teams with Warren Spahn and Lou Burdette was the big hitter. I had Lou Burdette once. We have a thing in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Braves Historical Society, and it's a great thing. And we had Lou Burdette come as a guest speaker. And while he was alive, and he's passed on now. But I have to tell you, he was the worst speaker I ever heard. But there was one thing. It was Lou Burdette.
Right. Well, don't you find
and he was a great guy.
Don't you find it strange that here the Braves, they moved from Boston, and they'd been a lousy team for low attendance, losing team, and then they become a winning team. I think tremendous attendance, and then before you know it, they're gone. It's like how could that? Don't you find that strange that they left Milwaukee?
Well, it's very much a heartbreak in Milwaukee, and the owner from Boston, they moved him to Milwaukee, then sold him to a group of investors from Chicago, who were engaged also in the southern market in Atlanta, and they said, "Oh, wait a minute, there's no Major League Baseball here," and it was a tremendous opportunity, so much so that they couldn't pass it up. So what comes goes, and then we got the Brewers. Brewers have now stuck for over 50 years, so we're happy about that. Milwaukee's a great baseball town, and I think our attendance, even though the municipality may not be that great, but our attendance is like 8 or 9 among all major league clubs. It's really steady. We have a beautiful stadium that's now 20 years old. I can hardly believe it. Used to be called Miller Park. Now this year it'll be, the naming rights are American Family Insurance.
I'd like to talk about Leo Durocher for different reasons. The '69 Cubs. You mentioned Tony La Russa being an old guy. Oh, it's great, and hopefully he won't be like Durocher in '74 in Houston with Cesar Cedeno, because I thought that was an interesting. I always wanted to learn more about, because that was actually perfect. You have this. By then, Durocher was an old guy, and he beat Cleveland in '54, his only World Series title as a manager, and then '51. Now he was. I believe he was when the Giants won the pennant when Bobby Thompson home run.
Right.
Was he with them at that? I know he was with Brooklyn and then now you mentioned on the telephone in '69 you thought that he played the guys too much. Do you think he was too? I heard like he would mock Ernie Banks, and do you think he was also just too hard on the guys that they just ended up hating him in '69 with the Cubs?
That's a great question, Peter. I can just imagine. Well, Durocher wouldn't be afraid of anybody after all those years in the big leagues and being at the top of the game. So even Ernie Banks wouldn't be off limits for him. And so I'm sure maybe he said, "Oh, Ernie, you're too lackadaisical or something." I don't know, but I can't remember ever hearing that, because Ernie was there for every play. Ernie walked into the clubhouse and said, "Oh, let's play 2 today," because he came from Texas. It might be 100 degrees in Texas. They play doubleheader, no problem. We'll get 2 games out of the way. And so it was 90 degrees in Chicago, and they were all lagging in the clubhouse. And Ernie came in and said, "Well, we should play 2 today," and the reporters picked up on it. And Ernie was spectacular. When you look at Ernie's records, MVP 57, shortstop, leads the league in home runs, and was also a Gold Glover at shortstop. So it's hard to top that. And he was also a perfect gentleman all the time.
Well, by 1969, Durocher was getting older, and he'd been around He'd played, I think, in the 20s, and the country was changing. So I think that's an interesting. Just that I think.
Yeah.
And just because you don't, I mean, to me, it's in the. Of course, I'm not a Cubs fan, but I mean, we see beauty in things, and I mean, I think that's probably a beloved team. Has to be a beloved team. You can't just always be forever feeling miserable because they didn't win the pennant.
Yeah, you get pandered as a Cub fans being it's the lovable losers, but that's not really the case. Why we like them. For me growing up, I remember being about 10 years old in the late 50s. I might go down to a ball game at Wrigley Field. I lived in the Chicago suburbs, and it'd be 60 cents for a bleacher seat and $1.25 for a grandstand. But that would be the difference between whether I bought one hot dog or 2. And my mother would give us $5, and that would take care of all the travel on the Greyhound bus to the L to get to the ballpark, and then buy a ticket and then come home. But we always had this, we might have 10, 12 people, and then the eldest would be 12 years old. When you think about that, who would do that today? You wouldn't even think about that. But we'd always have to say 10 cents, save 10 cents for the call from the where the bus dropped us off, and then we were about 3 miles from where that was, a little bit further west than Mount Prospect, Illinois. And I remember there was one time with about 8 guys, I was the only one who kept at least 10 cents so we could make the phone call to say, come pick us up.
Yeah, I watched every game of the '82 World Series, and that's the only time the Brewers have been in the series. And I just love the '82 Milwaukee Brewers, the Brew Crew, and Cleveland picked up Gorman Thomas in '83 in a trade for Rick Manning. And I thought, oh wow, we've got, because I thought Gorman Thomas was the coolest player, on the Storm Gorman, and they had Harvey Keene, who Cleveland picked up in the infamous Rocky Colavito deal as their manager. And so anyway, the '82 Brew Crew. You want to talk about that team?
Well, a little bit. The thing that struck me the most that season was, like in June, they changed the manager and made Harvey Keene the manager, and the Buck. What was it? Buck Rogers, I think, was the manager's name, and he was authoritarian, and yet it was a veteran club. You had Paul Mahler, Robin Yount,
Sal Banda with third, Raleigh Fingers, Don Sutton.
Don Sutton came in at the end, and he won the big games at the end because we were really on it here. And they went into a final weekend series to win the American League division against Baltimore. And so they had 4 games at Baltimore, and all they had to do was win one of them. Well, sure enough, they dropped the first 3. And then they get to the last game, and they put Don Sutton in to win the last game, which he had just pitched down the stretch for them, and it was a great acquisition. But by golly, the Brewers got some hits, and he got a big lead and held the lead, and the Brewers won the 4th of the 3 games to get in. So then there were celebrations in Milwaukee. We were dancing on Wisconsin Avenue, just like we did with the 57 Braves. It's just ecstatic. And then they won the next part of the playoffs, and we were dancing again the following Sunday. We had 3 Sundays in a row we were dancing on Wisconsin Avenue, and then we were in the World Series. So that was against the Cardinals. And the thing I remember most, I live about 15 minutes from the stadium. And then after the 5th game, the last one they played at Milwaukee, I hear this at night after the game. It's like 8 o'clock at night, and I hear this. It's just it sounded like a motorboat or something, and it was going to an airstrip not far from where I live, and where they parked the blimps. And it was the blimp going overhead that was the Goodyear blimp. And I went, now we're really there.
The big time, the Goodyear blimp.
Right. And I'll never forget that sound. But they lost the last game in St. Louis. I really thought that they lost the World Series in Game 2. And that was when their former catcher, Darrell Porter, got up with 2 outs and runners on first and third in the 2nd inning of Game 2. And they had won the first game like 10-0. And they were winning at this time. But runners on first and third, and it's the way baseball goes. So here you got a good hitter, Darrell Porter. So I'm thinking, man, why don't you? He's the catcher, though. Why don't you walk him and get to the pitcher, and then load up the bases? But no, they decided to pitch to Porter, and by golly, he hit the triple, drives in both runs, and then next guy gets a hit and he scores too. So all of a sudden we're losing 4-1, and that was so we lost Game 2, and to me that was the key point in the series. And I knew it at the time. I said, don't pitch to him. Don't pitch to him.
You mentioned Phil Niekro, who we had in Cleveland. He gave us a good year in '86, and then into '87. You have anything about Phil Niekro? He's in your book, right?
Yes. Right. When we put, I was amazed, and the thing why I really liked Phil Niekro in the book is that he, I think, is the oldest pitcher that ever pitched, on a regular basis in the big leagues. And he was like 47, I think, in his last year. Mm-hmm. When you think about that, I played amateur baseball till I was 42, and that was pretty good, but my legs gave out, and they were, I remember hitting a hard ball to the right fielder, and he almost threw me out at first base.
Our guest has been Mr. J.D. Thorne, author of 2 baseball books, The 10 Commandments of Baseball and Baseball's Winning Ways. The time has flown. J.D., do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
Well, my final thoughts would be baseball is a wonderful sport, and don't give up on it. It may seem too slow sometimes now in today's modern world, but it builds, and it has a drama to it that if you pay attention to it, it's a lot. It can be a lot of fun.
Well, I agree with you completely. It's a wonderful game. As Babe Ruth said, the greatest game God ever allowed man to invent. Thank you so much, Mr. J.D., for coming on the show tonight. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next week, we will have David Finoli, author of Pittsburgh Sports Books. He will be on the show. And, dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. J.D. Thorne.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, very good.